All right, so I got a great clip here for you guys of one of Katie Porter's famous whiteboard takedowns. This one is specifically centering around the issue of inflation, which, as I've been talking about throughout this entire inflationary period that we've been seeing over the last couple of months and almost a year at this point, has basically been due to two main factors. Number one would be increase in supply side costs due to the pandemic, due to the fact that we have exported our manufacturing base overseas on behalf of corporate America, and so we had a lot of weakness and instability in our supply chains. But then the main factor, number two, would just be corporate price gouging, right? We see all of these corporations and all of these industries, whether it's on food or it's on gas prices, all of those core places where we have been seeing significant inflationary pressure, you're simultaneously seeing all of these corporations making record profits. And so that's basically what has been the main driver of inflation. And she's going to break this down in as simple of a way as you could possibly ask for, with, of course, the graphs and statistics to back it up. So let's go ahead and get into this.
According to this chart, what is the biggest driver of inflation during the pandemic? The dark blue is the recent period.
It would be corporate profits.
And what is that percentage?
It is 54%, and that number does stay that level of high if you update that number to more recent numbers as well.
So over half of the increased prices people are paying are coming from increases in corporate profits.
Yes, the unit price index is reflected in corporate profits as opposed to other costs.
And how does that compare to historically to other periods of inflation or over other periods of economic time?
As reflected there and in other analysis, it is significantly higher in this recovery, 11.5%.
And what is it today?
53%.
So I want to make sure everyone in America understands this chart. What is a unit labor cost?
The cost, wages and associated
Right.
work costs.
So we could just wages. What is a non-labor input cost?
A variety of things, including maintenance and investments.
Okay, so I have to buy the stuff to make the widget. I have to have a factory. I have to keep the lights on. I have to hire someone to make the widget. That's this stuff. And this is what I add on top.
Okay, so I mean, listen, I think she broke it down in as succinct a way as you could possibly ask for. So, I mean, even just looking at the breakdowns and comparisons between this recent pandemic era inflationary period, compare that to the 1979 through 2019 average in terms of what causes prices for commodities and consumer goods to go up. I mean, look at the difference here. I mean, typically in the 1979 to 2019 average, you have unit labor costs, in other words, just the cost of employing people to do the work that is actually providing the value for these companies, that sometimes, at least on average, does actually play a significant role in escalating prices over time because you have rising wages. Now, granted, if you actually look in the aggregate, wages have not been keeping pace with productivity. We have, starvation wages for tens of millions of workers across this country, and that's obviously completely pathetic. But at the same time, I mean, look at the difference between that versus this inflationary period that we're seeing right now. So, I mean, unit labor costs are down here as the single lowest factor of these three, accounting for only 8%, less than 8% of the inflationary pressure that we have been seeing. And then you have the supply side costs, which is this part right here, which is at roughly like 30%. And then by far the largest portion of this graph is just corporate profits. So in other words, if you're mad about inflation, if you're mad about paying high gas prices or higher food prices or whatever it may be, you can thank corporate America, because the main factor in terms of why people, average Americans, working class people, are getting blasted by inflation right now is because corporations and Wall Street is just price gouging them. They are using this narrative of inflation. They are aided and abetted by Republicans and conservative Democrats who are trying to make arguments that, wages have gotten too high, which ties into the current Fed policy, which I'll get to here in a second. But, making these arguments that, it was all of these radical socialist big spending packages that Joe Biden and Democrats put forward. That's what has been driving inflation. It's complete bullshit. I mean, you can see it here directly in the data. If it was true that it was the big spending packages, if it was true that it's because, we have a tight labor market and workers have so much leverage right now within the economy and they're getting all of these fat paychecks, if that was what was driving inflation, then you would see either stagnating profit margins or you would see a reduction in their profit margins. But you're not only not seeing that, you're seeing record profits right now. And so again, this ties into the current insanity of number one, Democrats' strategy going into the midterms in terms of economic messaging. And this is something that I don't think that any Democrats that I've been tracking, even some some that I'm like nominally more in favor of, like John Fetterman, they haven't been going aggressive enough on this, right? Because, the main issue going into the midterms in terms of all of the polling data we have seen recently, the main issue is inflation and the economy. So, you can run your campaigns and advocate for abortion rights and all of these other vitally important issues. But if you're just leaving this issue aside on the economy and the inflationary crisis that people are facing right now, and you're not addressing that, and you're not explaining to people what the main drivers of this actually are and how you are going to go about passing policies in order to address that, then people are just going to, by default, blame the Democratic Party for their current economic woes, and Republicans are going to be winning on that message battle. So on the political front, it's just complete malpractice. It is bad politics to not be going out and, aggressively going after corporate America and Wall Street and putting forward pieces of legislation like a windfall profits tax on the gas companies, or, whatever you can do, price caps, do something, right, in order to actually force them to eat into their own profit margins instead of eating into the wallets of working class people in this country, right? That's what you should be doing politically and economically. But then on the second point here that I think is important to hammer home on is not only are Democrats not aggressively making those arguments or trying to address inflation in a really meaningful capacity, but on top of that, they are just sitting back and allowing the Federal Reserve to push forward with their current policy right now of hiking interest rates and, in the words of Jerome Powell, trying to get wages down and increase unemployment. They're just letting them go forward with that strategy, which, as you can see on the graph there, if labor costs are only less than 8% of the contributing factors towards inflation right now, then how the fuck is increasing employment and getting wages down going to fix inflation? It's not. And again, that's not even just my opinion. That's also the opinion of Jerome Powell himself again. I mean, you go back to when Elizabeth Warren was questioning him in that Senate hearing, and she straight up asked him, she said, is this strategy by the Federal Reserve going to be able to get grocery prices down or going to be able to get gas prices down? And he just admitted it. He said, no, it's not going to do that. And the reason for that is that the Federal Reserve literally does not have the tools in order to address inflation in the ways that we need to, given the specific nature of this current inflationary period. All that they can do is try to tamp down demand. That's their only tool in their toolbox in order to handle this, right? By going after the interest rates and hiking them significantly, which they have been doing, and in the meantime, potentially plunging us into a recession and creating an unemployment crisis just completely artificially, which again is not actually going to get to the root of why we have been seeing such massive inflation recently. So, Democrats need to not only be much more aggressive in the messaging and saying, here are the X, Y, and Z policies that we will be able to get passed if we get, a couple more senators, if we hold on to the House of Representatives. Here's what our economic plan is to address inflation. Not only are they just completely avoiding that issue almost in its entirety and choosing to solely focus on abortion going into the midterms. So not only are they, using a political malpractice, but on the economic front, you're also potentially going to be destroying millions and millions of people's lives for what? Because you don't want to aggressively through the legislative process through Congress, you don't want to aggressively push for policies that could confront corporate America in a meaningful way that could, address the fact that corporations are making billions of dollars in record profits right now by just straight up price gouging the American people. I mean, this is like the single biggest story that almost nobody is talking about in an accurate way, right? I mean, you go and look at how mainstream media covers this. You go and look at how, conservatives and even many Democratic politicians are talking about inflation right now. They have no legitimate, description for the American people in terms of why this is happening and what the actual solutions are. So, I mean, credit to Katie Porter for at least coming out and, exposing this and doing her typical like whiteboard takedown and stuff. But at the end of the day, I mean, if you're a Senate candidate with the Democratic Party, if you are running in one of these House races, the two main things that you should be focusing on right now are number one, of course, abortion rights. That's going to be a big factor going into the midterms. But number two, use this as an opportunity to go after the 1%, right? That is always going to be an extremely salient and popular criticism. Go after Wall Street, go after corporate America, call them out for price gouging the American people. You can just straight up show people their profit margins. You can show them these stories coming out about the record profits of, the big oil and gas companies, or the record profits of some of these food production companies that have damn near monopoly control over these industries. I mean, this is what you should be focusing on if you are actually trying to go into the midterms with a solid a strategic approach to it. But instead, they're basically just throwing their hands up, relying on the fact that hopefully abortion rights being stripped away from Americans around this country right now in conservative held states and being threatened at the federal level as well by certain Republicans. They're just basically relying on that threat that's hanging over people's head as if that's going to be enough to secure them a dub in the midterms, which is just straight up not going to be. I mean, again, we know the polling data on this, the economy, inflation, that's going to be the number one issue. We also know, according to the same polling data, that Republicans are much more trusted on the economy, which is just completely fucking insane, because even with all of my critiques of the Democratic Party corruption and, you know, their lack of a will to fight for meaningful policies to materially improve people's lives, at the same time, Republican strategies would actively make all of these things worse for the American people. So the fact that people view the Republican Party as better able to handle this current economic crisis, this current inflation crisis, is completely fucking insane and gets to the heart of how flawed the current Democratic Party is, with their complete unwillingness to confront their own donors, the donor class that funnels money into their campaigns, the billionaire class, the top 1%. I mean, there's a tiny, tiny minority of Democratic politicians like Bernie Sanders, members of the Squad, Katie Porter, right, who are actually talking about this in an accurate way right now.
Everyone is saying good politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying